build a strong posterior chain for athletes. And what the heck does that even entail? So we've got looking at gluteal thigh, lower back muscles, hammies, and what does that mean? And I've always wondered this too when we're talking about the aspects of factoring this into posterior chain. Do the calves, do the gastrocs, does the soleus, does any of that factor into posterior chain discussion? And should that factor into posterior chain discussion? Is a thought that I've always had. So once we start to think about, I like to look at from a strength perspective. I'm looking at, okay, posterior chain, that's the realm. Athletes, this is the realm. Posterior chain, hamstrings, glutes, lower back, and I would argue to a point that posterior chain would involve some type of soleus or gastroc discussion as well. So we identify that's where we're talking about. That's the realm, the muscles that we're talking about. Then the next aspect that we're looking at is, okay, what are the glutes? What are the hamstrings? What are the gastroc, the soleus, the lower back as well? What are those responsible for? Okay, so from a broad sense, if you look at hip extension, okay, knee flexion, okay, pelvic stability, to a point, pelvic stability, lateral movement as well. And then if we're looking at the soleus and the gastroc, we're going to see plantar flexion. We're going to see along those lines lengthening with dorsiflexion. And so I like to look at it that way then too, is like, okay, from a general perspective, posterior chain is going to be responsible for hip extension, managing and handling hip flexion. To a point, we could even argue adduction if we think about that on the lines of posterior chain. Lower back is responsible for the lower back region is going to be responsible for stabilization of the spine and of the pelvic area. Okay, so that's like the next way that we'll mine into this. And then we start to look at going into the sport depth thought. So then I take, okay, if I'm training a shot putter versus a wrestler versus a marathon runner or a distance swimmer, right? So we take a shot putter, a wrestler, a distance swimmer, or even a offensive lineman, a wrestler, and a marathoner, a distance runner. They're three completely different areas, right? So then we have to look at strength, maximal strength. What are some areas that we would need to look at, and how are we going to focus on strengthening that posterior chain, and where could we see, weight room numbers potentially be weak if someone has a weak posterior chain? Well, one, they're going to struggle with single leg squat. They're going to struggle with a high bar full range of motion back squat. They're going to struggle with a low bar full range of motion back squat. They're going to struggle with a front squat for that trunk stability. Although front squat's a little bit more quad based, you are still going to be using the lower back and the hamstrings to maintain and achieve hip flexion and hip extension, and to maintain that upright trunk with the lower back. So that's like one area that I look through, and then I say, okay, if we see someone that has a weak posterior chain, okay, and their posterior chain is weak in the sense that they can't do a single leg squat with body weight for like a set of 5 on each leg, that's going to tell me their glutes aren't super active with their lower back. Their lower back doesn't provide the stability. And then, the hamstrings also struggle with hip extension in that position. So we know that we can train that accordingly with a single leg squat or a high bar back squat, or even an RDL, something like that, right? So the RDL will help target that. So then if I look at a shot putter, we're going to look at the range, the pattern, and the load of what can an offensive lineman or a shot putter move. And then we can compare that to a wrestler. So if we have a wrestler who weighs 195 pounds, those numbers of comparison are also going to be different and lighter, most likely, than the offensive lineman. Okay. And then further down into the sport depth 5, where we have like a long distance runner or a marathoner or a distance swimmer or a triathlete, when we see weak posterior chain there, the load is going to be probably about 50% of the body weight where we would see a potential weakness. Okay, so if you have a kid that weighs, or an athlete that's 150 pounds and they're a 5,000 meter runner, you know, as long as that athlete can single leg squat about 100 pounds for 5 on each leg, they're probably going to be okay. So then we have to just keep mining deeper and deeper and deeper, and then see, okay, now we have these sports specific aspects around the posterior chain based off of the context that the sport depths provide. Okay, so then we can really just build off from that point. And then we can start to look at, if somebody is weak, what are we going to do to fix it? And I think that I know I talk and I beat a dead horse when I say this stuff around the single leg squat, but it's like we're constantly discussing a single leg squat and we still don't have people using single leg squats. And then as soon as they use them, it's like the whole world explodes. You know, their hamstrings start to light up, their glutes are sore or more active. They start to run a little bit faster. They have better mechanics on the backside. They have stronger mechanics on the front side. They hold better posture with their trunk so that they can rotate a little bit while they're sprinting. And all these things really start to lead to better locomotion, more explosiveness, and overall just more general strength. And so I think that's like the one big aspect here that I like to think through with the lens of the training the posterior chain is, it's got to have some type of sport application, and we've got to have some way that we can train that pretty regularly. So I wanted to go into our first video reaction right here, because this is going to be with Natasha Alki when she was at the gym here. Dude, she was doing walking lunges with like 60, 70 pounds.
Extension at the finish of a snatch, or extension at the finish of a clean, or maybe we even have someone who doesn't jump really well. One of those exercises that you can use to increase your hamstring.
What was this,
1
year ago?
2 years ago? Would be a leg curl. And this is something that is a really good exercise as well. If you injure your hamstring from sprinting, you struggle to use it effectively when you're getting through the phases of the sprint.
The thing I really like about
problems, using this as a rehabilitative
a leg curl
you can do
is that you can really load
even doing a slower eccentric. So
the eccentric. You can do a bilateral, let's say a bilateral concentric, and then you can take one leg off and do the eccentric super overloaded.
And then like a 3 to 4 second eccentric. That's probably not nearly enough weight for Natasha, since she just doubled 340 on the back squat. She could probably do this.
And that's the other thing. It's like if you're looking at
she also just did walking lunges with 60s while I was crying.
So walking lunges with 60s, back squatting 345 for reps. She deadlifted 405, I think, at this time when she was here. And it's like
a ton of force with a slow eccentric. So
some of the big stuff around posterior chain is literally, especially with women, is like, dude, we just got to get you stronger. You got to squat more. A lot of times high school football players like, yo guys, you're not even back squatting, like you're not even back squatting. You know, Natasha just talked about how we just said about Natasha hit 345 for a double. Like she deadlifted 405 for like a triple. High school football guys are barely squatting ass to grass with 345. Like, if you want to strengthen your posterior chain, dude, just do the squat more, single leg squat more, do more heavier RDLs, do a snatch grip RDL. And this actually here, I love this for some more speed specific work here.
And then you sort of force that hamstring to wake up, and then you can just do a normal back extension here.
Love this.
Now, if you want to focus more on like gun from our sponsor, gun from Bob and do you have any specific technique that you usually use
for these?
Yeah.
I kind of like making them like, no, lower it one more. I kind of like making it glute ham focus.
Okay.
So when I come up, I think about like really trying to focus on squeezing with the glutes, and at the bottom kind of like getting a nice stretch in the hamstring. So sometimes like I'll do weighted ones, but more so if I'm doing like body weight ones, I'll like really reach behind here to get
really
that like
lengthen it.
nice stretch,
Yeah,
and then
that's
like
good.
come up focusing on squeezing with like glutes.
Okay. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, so what Natasha's saying is like, look, if you're on a back extension here, you can really, really lengthen your hamstrings, and when you lengthen your hamstrings, they're going to have more mechanical tension. When you have more mechanical tension, it's going to lead to a little bit more strength.
She does a really good job keeping her feet almost neutral. And again, I stole this directly from John Meadows. Try and feel that your groin as well.
Yeah, and this is where sometimes, especially if you lengthen enough, you'll feel it in your adductors there.
So you can get here.
Let's see here.
Yeah, so just a traditional glute ham. So it's going to be lighting up the hamstrings, lighting up. Good, perfect. Perfect way to end the.
Okay, so I think that what my whole goal there, and like seeing Natasha smash these, is like we're oftentimes making these comparisons or looking at ourselves and saying like, okay, what can we do better? And if we're isolating a range of our group, a specific group of muscles, and especially once we look at like the glutes and the responsibility that they have with acceleration, with jumping, with cutting, and being super fast and super explosive, and coming out of the blocks, or if we're running a 40, being super quick, like glutes, hamstrings play a huge role. And then we forget, the right now that we're seeing in sports performance, everybody's talking about the spinal engine. And when we're talking about being in a unilateral position like a single leg squat, the main reason why it transfers so well, outside of it lengthens your hamstring, it lengthens your glutes. It's also forcing the stability of the spinal engine to occur. And then that enables you to then operate at faster speeds. And I think that's got to just be hammered home, that once you're really thinking through hip extension and then the posterior chain and hip flexion and even acceleration on a barbell, like this is where this stuff pays off. And then I'm going to get into some of these research papers here. I want to answer Noah's question. Dane, I saw you mention Zercher RDLs are good. Are they good for upper and mid back as well as the glutes and the hamstrings? And I think that that's like one thing I'm learning the most about currently in the world of sports performance is I had sort of been anti Zerchers for so long, right? Like just didn't care about Zerchers, didn't want to play around with them. They hurt my elbow. I cried about it, blah, blah, blah. And I think that as I've gotten a little bit more into the ground of playing around with Zercher squats and Zercher RDLs especially, I've realized that if my mid back or upper back is slightly rounded, kyphotic here, right, I actually will lengthen my hamstrings more when I'm doing an RDL. So you're actually getting stronger range of motion, or a greater range of motion from the hamstrings, and you have to be super stable in the lower back, and then the glutes squeeze when you come back through. And because of the positioning and the lever arm and what the lever arm of the Zercher makes for the RDL when you're holding it there, it really, really can do some freaking crazy stuff, especially when we're talking about just straight up growth. And then you add in like a Zercher walking lunge, and I think it's phenomenal. So let's go into this paper here, the activation of gluteal, thigh, and lower back muscles in different squat variations performed by competitive bodybuilders. So what this means for resistance training. And so what we're looking at is like they're looking at the present study investigated the activation of the glutes, the thighs, the lower back, different squats. So 10 males. Okay, they're going to look at full range of motion. They're going to look at parallel depth, and then they use large, I think this is funny, large feet stance, so like a sumo stance, enhancing the feet external rotation and front squat at 80% 1 RM. So the normalized surface electromyographic root mean square. Whoa, amplitude of glute max, glute medius, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, adductor longus, longissimus iliocostalis. So adductor longus would be, or like to think about your groin, and then we're looking at longissimus and iliocostalis is going to be like the thing about your erectors, and what is happening during the ascension and during the descension of these movements. And so they're looking at glute max, glute med was the highest. So the greatest EMG RMS root mean square amplitude of the glute max and glute med was found in the front squat versus all other exercises. And dude, this is a big one. We actually just filmed a video this morning where I called out high school football players for not front squatting enough. And the reason being here is that if we're looking at activation from this study right here, okay, this study is showing us that, and activation doesn't always mean it's the best, but it is a decent example for us to then see, like, if we're front squatting effectively with a traditional stance and we have a full range of motion, full range, okay, this is going to light up your glute max and your glute med. And the reason this is really interesting is that if we front squat frequently, it transfers really well to back squat. I've also seen that if people can front squat like 1.8 to 2 times body weight, they're going to have a vertical jump well over 35 inches. They're going to have a broad jump well over 9.5 feet. Okay. They're going to have just power output is through the roof. They're going to clean heavier. They're going to easily clean heavier. They're going to be able to execute movements super easy, but nobody wants to front squat because it's so uncomfortable. It's so challenging. It's such a hard lift, and it never really gets easy. It literally stays that complex and that difficult the entire time. Like somebody who's front squatted, 220 kilos, they will still tell you, even if you front squat 220 kilos, when you front squat 140, it's still hard. It's still hard when you front squat 170 and 50 kilos under your PR. It's still hard. That's why no one wants to front squat. And then the interesting part with this paper is that even the bodybuilders are seeing you will get greater glute activation from a front squat than you will from a back squat, and you'll get greater glute activation than you will from a sumo back squat, so a wider stance back squat, and even a partial range. I think that's some interesting stuff. So they additionally, front squat elicited iliocostalis more than all other exercises. I think that makes sense because of the front-loaded situation. During the ascending phase, both sumo back squat and externally rotated sumo back squat showed greater vastus lateralis and adductor longus activation compared to all other exercises. Okay, so if we've got somebody who has a really wide stance or they're externally rotated with their feet, actually that's pretty much how I squat, not super wide, but with my feet that way, you're going to see more vastus lateralis and some more action from their groin. So if you have an athlete who has some groin issues or groin weaknesses, this is a good squat position. Moreover, rectus femoris activation was greater in the front squat compared to the full back squat. Traditionally, I think that's been pretty well known. Front squats are going to be a little bit more quad dominant, but you're still going to get that in a full range of motion back squat. No between exercise difference was found in the vastus medialis and the longissimus. Okay, so longissimus is also an erector there. So pretty much we're seeing vastus medialis and longissimus are going to be active in all back squats, sumo back squats, externally rotated back squats, and partial range of motion back squats, all compared with front squats as well. Okay, front squat needs more backward stabilization during the descending phase, meaning like you almost are, as you're going down, you have to stabilize the weight from pulling you forward, right? So you're going to have more backward stabilization. Larger feet stance increases thigh muscles. So the wider you go, you're going to see a little bit more thigh muscles, which is actually surprising to me, possibly because of their longer length. These findings show how bodybuilders can uniquely recruit muscles when performing different squat variations. And I think that this is a big lesson here on this paper, the activation of gluteal, thigh, and lower back muscles in different squat variations that I think that we ignore in sports performance. Is like, okay, bodybuilders will say, okay, I've got a weakness in my groin, or I have a weakness in my specific glute. I need my ass to get bigger. I need to front squat more with this specific stance based off of this. And it's not like you are just doing that squat pattern, but they get it. Whereas in sports performance, they'd say, somebody would read this, like somebody would say, why do we want to train like bodybuilders? Well, the reason why we want to train like bodybuilders is because we can pinpoint weaknesses in an athlete. If I see an athlete struggle with hip extension in the acceleration phase of a sprint, guess what? They're going to start front squatting more. And a lot of that has to do with training like bodybuilders. If you want to train like a bodybuilder, that means that you're taking different movement patterns and you're trying to target very precise areas based off the activation of that movement pattern. This paper's literally teaching you, like, bodybuilders get it. If they front squat with this specific stance, they're going to get more glute work. So we should be training the same way as strength and conditioning or sports performance. If I have an athlete who's got a totally inactive glute, or in the sense that like they sort of round forward and they fall forward, because I don't want to say the inactive glute bullshit sort of drives me nuts. But it's like, hey guys, guess what? If I have an athlete who's a shot putter and their groin's bugging them, I'm going to have them squat with a wider stance that's going to be more partial range of motion just to get more activation from their adductor longus to try and heal it, make it stronger, and then have them come back in a ready to play situation. And we're doing that by training like a bodybuilder. So that's like an interesting aspect. But then, further going back to it, if we just front squat all the time and you get your high school kids to front squat their best clean for like a set of 5 or a set of 10, dude, your kids are going to be savages, total savages. Just get your kids to front squat, let alone anything else. Actually, DJ and I, so DJ is one of those coaches here at Garage Strength, and he's clean 207 kilos. He's just an absolute tank. We internally here at Garage Strength still devalue front squats, like zombie squats, front squats, bodybuilder front squats. We still devalue them because they're so good. It's like we forget about how good they are. And then you factor in like a front squat, a front single leg squat. Now you're talking, you want to talk about spinal engine? Do a single leg front squat. And then we can pair that with some type of contrast sequencing. That's where you start to get freaking training. Okay, posterior chain and core training. Posterior chain and core training improves pelvic posture, hamstrings to quadriceps ratio, and vertical jump performance. So going back to the beginning of this is we've got to think about, why are we going to train posterior chain? Okay, why are we going to use this as a region? And I think that one of the interesting parts is that if we can identify regions of the body, it does make it a little easier to dissect specific problems. So if we've got the shoulder girdle, right, or the pec, I know is just mainly your pec, but you can start to figure out like a little bit of inadequacies an athlete has when you focus on these regions. Then you look at like an individual or an athlete who is a sprinter, or who is going back to the sport depths. You have a shot putter, and we know that if they can increase their vertical jump, they have a greater power output, they're more explosive, they have greater impulse expression. Same thing with a running back, right? So if we increase a vertical jump, that's probably going to also help them with their speed. Okay, so now we can start to see why targeting the posterior chain or the hamstrings or the glutes, whatever it might be, we can start to figure out problem areas that an athlete might have based on, like somebody who starts to front squat. Oftentimes kids who start to front squat, they fall forward and they miss the weight forward, and they're not even tired or fatigued in their legs. It's actually their lower back, which is what you'll see from that last paper, is that a lot of that fatigue is from the strength that you gain out of the lower back. Okay, so I did want to bring that up. Poor pelvic posture demonstrated through anterior pelvic tilt. So they're looking at posture training, improving pelvic posture means getting rid of the anterior pelvic tilt. And that's sort of when your like hips are like rotated forward and you almost have like this super shelfy looking glutes and a lot of lower back pain usually. Okay. So anterior pelvic tilt has been known to produce musculoskeletal imbalances involving weaknesses of the abs and the pelvic musculature. Stretching and massage techniques have been reported to be effective in alleviating that, but it remains unclear if similar improvements can be elicited by posterior chain and core training. So the aim of this was to look at just 8 weeks posterior and core strengthening on APT, hamstrings to quad strength ratio. So how strong are your hamstrings compared to your quads? And then the vertical jump performance. Yeah, 8 weeks isn't that long. I think that's another factor that I will say is, Adem just said, what about pistol squats? The only thing with pistols is I feel that pistol squats are they're not as much posterior chain as they are quad based, but they're still great exercise. But here's the interesting part is like and we sort of see this, and I'm going to bring this up with research. Is like research is saying, this study is an 8-week study, right? Dude, so in our new level of peak strength, I'm building out. I've like over 1,000 weeks of programming is going into the app, into peak strength. When we're training beginners, and we've got like close to 6,000 hours of beginner training just over the last 2 years from the app as like research feedback. And that doesn't even include probably 10 to 15,000 hours of beginner training on site. I just want to put out there that like, I actually think we should be looking at training in like 18 to 36 week blocks. Like literally that's what we should be studying. There shouldn't be like an 8-week study. And now I say this, and it is fun to see like when you do like a one-off 4-week study to see if there's any quick impact on breaking a plateau or something like that. But we still need to be thinking much more long-term with progress. And the reason, where I'm going with this is like, this paper is an 8-week study on anterior pelvic tilt. In the recent update that's going into peak strength, it's going to come out in July. I've got 36 weeks of beginner training. So beginners have to train 36 weeks of doing progressions every single time they come into the gym on weightlifting movements. So like a snatch, if they want to learn how to clean, let's say they're an American football player, they're in 7th grade and they have to learn how to clean, their warm up it's the progressions. Okay. It's the clean progressions. And you do that for 36 weeks. And what ends up happening is that when you do that much work for 36 weeks on technique, it just becomes automatic, and we're focused much more on the long term then. And I think that's my one issue right here with this paper, is that it's an 8-week study. So with that little rant, I'm going to go into this now. 10 healthy males, 9 healthy females. So 19 individuals. The women were a lot younger than the men, plus or minus 12 years on the men. What? So the chicks were 26 and the dudes were like up to 38. About 70 kilos for the chicks. Performed resistance training 2 times a week, 45 minutes. 2 times a week? Dude, if you guys want to get strong, you better be training more than twice a week. Like, give me 4 days a week minimum. Okay, involving a combination of hip extensors and ab strengthening exercises for 8 weeks. And then they looked at pelvic tilt degree, vertical jump power, vertical jump height, hamstring to quad ratio at 60, 80, and 300 degrees following this. So anterior pelvic tilt, vertical jump power, vertical jump height, hamstring to quad ratios were significantly improved following 8 weeks of resistance training. So the main study emphasized that if you're looking at posterior chain and strengthening quad to hamstring issues, changing the posterior chain, changing the anterior pelvic tilt, you can get this done and increasing your vertical in 8 weeks. I wanted to see here, if we look at this paper, if I can see, I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't really see. I guess I could go in here. Let's see if I can get in here and actually look at the, I want to look at what's the protocol that they used. I might not be able to get into it. Yep. I can't get in there. Actually, wait, did that get me in there? Let's look at the protocol though, because I think that, I can't get in there. I think that that's like just something that we've got to be aware of, is like, if I'm really trying to build out someone's strength, like, and I like an athlete comes into me and they're like a sophomore in high school and they're like, yo, Dane, like I want to be really athletic, or I have even an older person, like somebody my age comes in and they want to get stronger, right? And they want to be healthier. Like, yo, we got to give me like, you got to give me like 2 years. Like, that's the big aspect here, is like an 8-week program on the front squat. You might see your front squat increase by 10 to 15 pounds, but like, dude, do it for a year and you're going to see that increase by like 30 to 50 pounds. And then imagine where that's going to put you. And I think that that's just something that we've got to throw out there long-term for increasing overall strength. So I want to go in and I want to look at some of the questions, and then I might even put up a little bit of a program here while I'm trying to answer some of these questions. So I felt that snatch grip RDL was a great way to develop the whole posterior chain. I would agree with that. And if we're looking at, let's do something like this. So we got like the exercise. Let's go day 1. Can you guys see? You guys can't see that. I'm going to move that over here shortly. Okay, so if we go here, let's see if I can move this down. You might not be able to see this. I'm trying to set up this program for you so you guys can see it. Let's see if I could copy and paste this. Okay, so you can see that. Perfect. All right. Snatch grip. Are there any study on squat range of motion and optimal training? I know Joel Seidman. So I think that the whole thing with optimal training is what are we looking at? What does that mean in a sense of like what is optimal? And I think we often will say that without defining it. And I think that as a coach, you have to acknowledge if we're training optimal, are we looking for max strength? Because then it's going to be a low bar partial range of motion. Are we looking for mobility? Because then it's going to be like pause, back squats, high bar, full range of motion. Are we looking for load? Because then it's going to be quarter squats, probably low to mid bar. Okay, so, and now, then we look at load. Does load make us stronger or more explosive? Like, so that's where it's like with the clarity around optimal, what's the adaptation that we look for? So, I think that's a couple big factors that we got to look at. Okay, so limitations of anterior knee displacement during back squat, the optimal back squat load for potential osteogenesis. You guys want to look at that? The optimal effects of fatigue from, let's just look at this because this would be optimal back squat load. And this is going to be regarding the posterior chain, right? So osteogenic potential of exercise is reported to be partially a function of the magnitude of training loads. So we're going to look at ground reaction force, rate of force development of the eccentric and concentric at 3 different loads. 12 subjects performed their back squat on a force platform. 80, 100, and 120% of their 1 rep max. Back squats were performed at, okay, so this is a good example. We're using 120%. That's where they get the highest ground reaction force in both eccentric and concentric. Nothing else was really found different. Performing the back squat at loads of 120% of the estimated 1 RM accomplished with reduced range of motion results in higher ground reaction forces than the back squat performed at 80 and 100. Yeah, that's not really doing much for us outside of like, hey, partial range of motion back squats can really help you potentially produce more ground reaction forces. Now, that would also be under the assumption that ground reaction forces are what we are looking for to increase your performance. And what's interesting with that one is that somebody who's a powerlifting fanatic, right, and not to be anti-powerlifting, but someone who's a powerlifting fanatic will say, ground reaction forces at partial range of motion had heavier loads and they had the ground reaction forces were thus higher, therefore it's better. Because at 120%, ground reaction forces were higher during a back squat at around 2 times body weight. Okay, so when you do a full range of motion clean and you catch that like amortization, when you catch it clean and you come out of the bottom, you will see ground reaction forces of around 2.5 to 3 times body weight. So based off of that deduction, we should be doing more cleans. And it's interesting. I actually saw a coach posting like the force plates of like partial range of motions saying like that's where we should be. But seeing that doesn't always mean that transfers the best to a specific motor pattern in a sport. Like that's the one thing we have also just got to be aware of. And if that's what we're looking at, I almost want to check because I actually just texted the biomechanist about this like right before I came on. So yes, for each leg, okay, here's a funny one. For each leg coming out of the bottom, okay, so catching a clean in the bottom position, okay, and I can show you this chart. I'm going to share this chart with you, okay. See if you can see that there. There's a glare. This chart is showing us that in each leg, 2.5 to 3 times body weight is what the athlete will achieve based on about a 85 to 90% 1 RM clean. 2.5 times to 3 times. I think we just had the NCAA champion pop in here in the discus. Absolute savage. Now, so think about that. If we're doing a clean and you catch it in the bottom position, that stretch shortening cycle at around 85 to 90% of your max will achieve 2.5 to 3 times body weight ground reaction force on each leg, not both legs, but left leg and right leg, 2.5 to 3 times body weight. That's extremely high. Okay, when we sprint at high speeds, it's around 4 times. So if we're if all's just grip and rip, that's not accurate. I know that's not accurate. I watch enough of your Instagram videos. If we are an athlete, right, that is trying to perform a high speed movement and we're trying to really light up our posterior chain, we can then take movements like a clean and then recognize that if the ground reaction forces are high and if the recruitment, remember a clean is in the front squat position, and we can also deduce based off of our bodybuilding research papers, if we train like bodybuilders and recognize that the front squat targets the glute max and the glute med more based off that research, now we can see the glute max, the glute med, and the quads, and to a point the lower back because of the stability that the back has to provide in the front squat position is going to be, your body is handling a massive amount of forces at very, very high speeds based off of that clean catch position. And that would be something I would recommend for someone who's in a sport like football. Now, I want to share this. If I had an athlete come in, I'm going to write this program. So if you guys are on Instagram, I'm over on YouTube Live, and you can see I'm actually putting up a program right now. So I would go like this. If I have somebody who is like a super weak posterior chain athlete, this is how I would set this up. Okay, I would go here. I'm not even going to do the last line. I'm just going to go real simple. Keep this as simple as possible. So we're going to go here. Day one's going to be super load based, much more load based. Okay, here. Let's actually do this. Let's go pause front squats. And then let's go with this here. Pause front squat. Like, let's just superset this with like staggered dumbbell RDL. There. Okay. And then we can go here, posterior chain. Let's think about what Natasha did. So that back extension, long range. And let's go Nordics. Okay. And then we can go on to day 2. And this is where I'm gonna pull in as a warm-up outside of the garage strength warm-up. This is gonna be a warm-up Jefferson curl. And this is from this is a tribute to Will Rotel. Loves the Jefferson curl as a warm-up. I actually was playing around with like a Zercher Jefferson curl yesterday in a squat position, which was pretty wild. Now I'm going to go here, okay? And I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and explain this to you guys, what I'm doing here. This is where we're going to get really high speed with it. And I've had this debate about high speed single leg movement or high speed hamstring movements. With our guys on site. And then this is going to be impulse based, let's say, $3B. Boom, 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 boom. Let's go here. Okay, so this 3A, 3B on day 2 might be something that I would alter a little bit. But if I have somebody who comes to me and they're like, man, my posterior chain is dead, right? Like they're struggling to get that lit up. And again, if you guys are on Instagram, you can see this program over on YouTube Live. So I would end up going in and saying, okay, let's go. We refer to this technical coordination here. Okay. And we just talked about the ground reaction forces that the biomechanists have showed us with about 85 to 90% of your 1 rep max, what that looks like as far as the stretch shortening cycle in the bottom of the clean. And what I like to do, I have both of these. If you notice, I have a low hang and a low hang for the power snatch. I really, really like if I have somebody who struggles with lower back stability with hamstring action. And hamstring action is really responsible for a lot of hip extension on the finish, okay? If I have a kid who's 15 and they struggle to jump, they struggle to do a broad jump, they struggle to do hurdle hops, they struggle to do box jumps, when they start to do like a low hang clean and you do like a 3 to 5 second eccentric, they learn the hip action because of the eccentric portion. So you can use it as like as like cheat mode to get them to have a more active posterior chain. Okay. And then when they catch that clean or they catch that power snatch, they start to work a little bit more effectively. And then if we can do other movements to sort of build on top of that, the imprint holds longer. It holds true longer. So like on day 1 here, I'm adding in those pause front squats. You guys saw the paper about glute med, lower back, pause front squats. That's what we're at. Staggered dumbbell RDLs. A lot of hamstring work because you get into knee flexion and hip flexion when you're doing a staggered dumbbell RDL. I really, really like those. Okay, then we would do like a super long range back extension and then here more knee flexion on the Nordics. Okay, we're going to do the Will Rattel Jefferson curl warm-up. Low hang power snatch here. Okay, so really try, and this would be somebody who's like vertical jump is sort of stuck. Maybe they don't have much speed either. They can't run fast. After we do the low hang power snatch, then I'm going to get into some single leg squat and drop single leg glute ham. And I want this to be fast. Single legs, we want to focus on that unilateral position. Remember that spinal engine, everybody's talking about it. Oh, that's like this new thing. Like, let's talk about it. Well, okay, single leg squats. Watch somebody do it, and you're going to see them execute it really well. And that's also usually the best single leg squatters are also typically going to be their fastest athletes. The drop single leg RDL is going to be all about force production as quick as possible. And then finally, I like to finish here. If we use this as a priming setup, we can really go high speed, single leg bounds, double leg bounds, something like that. I just wanted to put a couple things in there. Mini hurdle hops, slightly less intense. So this I would try and be focusing like not as intense as like if we were trying to measure for a distance. And the interesting part is like the reason why I put those in there is that you see these like tantrum hamstring leg curls on the bands and on the Swiss balls, and it's like, and you see like kids like 16 years old doing that, and it's like, dude, get that kid to leg curl the full stack. Get them to single leg squat like body weight for 10. Get them to back squat 10 reps of their best clean. And I guarantee you their tantrum bullshit hamstring exercise is going to look the exact same. It might look cool on Instagram, but they're going to get destroyed when they meet one of our guys who can single leg squat 315 for 5. Like you can do that. That's cool, but like it's not going to really do much in the realm of sports performance. And I think that that's some stuff we've just got to be aware of when we're training the posterior chain. Like, what's the goal? What's the adaptation that we're looking for? What's the actions that we're trying to achieve? And if we know that the glutes are responsible for speed and acceleration and power output, like then that's how we've got to be training it that way. So I wanted to bring that up. Lunge is probably the best range of motion for legs. Lunge is absolutely fantastic for it. Ethan's saying, I'm a 400-meter sprinter. Our deadlift's a good way to develop the posterior chain. Okay, this might be shocking. I might shock the world here, who actually cares, that I used to be super against. R2's got a good question, and I don't know to answer that exactly. R2, I don't know. When we release the next update, which is going to be Peak Strength 2.0, that that might be happening, but I actually can't answer that. I can't answer that, to be totally honest with you. Okay, so Tyagnet asked me, Ethan asked me, deadlifts. My stance, and maybe I should make a video of things that have changed. You know, what are the biggest things that I've changed in my mind as a coach? Throughout the last year, I've changed my mind on Zerchers. I've changed my mind on speed-based training. I've changed my mind on Zerchers, speed-based training, and then finally I've changed my mind also on front squats, in the sense that we underrate them still. We underrate them. And then finally, to a point, I've changed my mind on deadlifts. In the sense that I believe deadlifts are not as bad as I previously put off. I still do not think they're a replacement for a snatch or a clean. I still would not do them as my primary absolute strength movement. But I do believe that there can be, for certain individuals, a substantial benefit from doing deadlifts. And I think that I would still steer away from them for the most part, but I'm not, when I see athletes that have a big deadlift, and I see someone who also cleans and they deadlift very heavily, those are the freaks. Those are the absolute savages. Those are the absolute studs. Keist, it's changed quite a bit, and it's going to go through some serious, again, I've been spending, when I was just coaching in Rome, I spent about close to probably 60 hours programming. We're talking like thousands of weeks of programming, going through the data and just improving things, adding in endurance work, adding in sprint training, adding in more exercises. It's freaking awesome. And also it's like, I think that the biggest thing that we see too is that when people get into peak strength, they're held more accountable. They're averaging like 2.7 training sessions a week, something like that. It's like most people struggle to train once or twice a week. They struggle with the accountability aspect, and I think that's one cool part, like one of the really neat parts around peak strength is it's like it helps people stay focused long term on what we're trying to help you achieve. Adam could possibly create higher ground reaction force and cleans by adding bands to increase resistance and acceleration from the band during the catch and fighting bar speed. I don't disagree, but I have seen studies on that, and it's screwing with technical pull, technical execution. Adam's actually one of the people who's sort of changing me. Not that I'm still anti deadlift for the most part, but in Adam's case, I'm not as anti deadlift. I'm pretty pro deadlift. Unrelated, but I'm training a kid. He's 16. He's currently training 4 days a week in high school. He doesn't snatch, doesn't clean, and to train those in some jumps, or is that too much for him? Wait, is there room to train those in some jumps and sprints? Yeah, if you're training 4 days a week, you're training a high school kid that's 16. He's currently training 4 days a week with his high school. Oh, okay. Is there room to train those? And yes, no, I think, okay, so Nick's asking, this kid trains with his high school football team. Can he come in? This is what I would say. Teach this kid how to be very, very dialed in when he's doing his snatches and his cleans. Okay, get him super dialed in with it. Make it like his speed lifts. Okay, and then have 1 day of jumps. And then find out what he's doing on like three of the 4 days with his high school team, because it's probably he's clowning around for at least 2 of those days. I know you don't work too much with kettlebells, but what do you think of using them to develop the posterior chain? So I think kettlebells are fine. I do. I think that they're okay. I think that it still goes back to you're doing a kettlebell swing or some kettlebell cleans and stuff. And this is like my My comeback with this, and Tisha just said he's 14, squats 300, bench 180. Yeah, that's great. I think you could squat maybe a little more, bench like 225. Dude, you just keep working 4 days a week, and you're gonna smash that. I think that with kettlebell work, my downfall is like if I have a kid clean and I have them do front squats a lot, and they're doing plyos and they're doing benches and they're doing heavy pull-ups, I can get a kid to do like very proficient kettlebell work. Within like one session, they can execute a lot of kettlebell exercises very well. And I guess my argument has always been like, and I'm not saying that they're not effective. I think they're great. I think they're a really good training tool. I think they're really something that can be done effectively. But if I see that in training, and I've worked with kids that are really like diehard kettlebellers, but then when they go front squat, they're hitting like a 185 front squat and they're falling on their face. And it's like, well, there's not a transfer over to the absolute strength. And maybe that's just my world of like, I am so into, those types, like a heavier pull or a heavier front squat, and in the off season, not when they're in season, not when they're peaking, that I don't see the transfer as much from a kettlebell. What's your opinion on reverse grip, behind the back, snatch grip, deadlifts? Who is doing that, Josh? And that would be something that you would do, Josh. I could see you doing that. I don't know why my screen is changing here. This is really weird. Huh. Hopefully it's not changing. Let's see. So, yeah, I hope that helped with you guys. Hope this answered all of your questions. Best upper body exercises for sprinters: dumbbell bench, pull-ups, rope climbs, lighter dumbbell benches, explosive dumbbell benches for sure. Yeah, let me know if that helps. I got to get down to a pretty big training session because next week is U.S. Nationals for weightlifting, and it is also the Olympic trials start next week. So it's starting to get pretty intense with the competitive work and with the coaching that we're doing right now, and it's stressful. It's very stressful, but it's involving a lot of this posterior chain work. So I'm going to get down to training. Until next time, peace.